Greetings, comrades, and welcome to the Eastern Border. I read the political article about Trump's plan to stop the war in Ukraine, and that's not a plan to stop the war in Ukraine. Now, now I don't want to get into too much into this because you'll read this in all of your newspapers. However, I would like to say that this plan is, in essence, a complete capitulation. It's a surrender plan. It's a plan of a weak leader who is just unable to cope with anything and literally is just betraying his own interests because, well, he's intending to give land away to the aggressor, and that way he hopes to prevent war. I mean, if China sees how Russia, being the aggressor and the clear villain of this story, has received benefits for their assault, do you think it will not rather encourage them to do horrible, horrible things? I think it will, definitely. And I am still 100% sure that Trump has no idea that, yes, indeed, we in the Baltics really focus on our defense. And those countries in the EU that don't, well, they should start doing that more, definitely, because I don't even know. And we should all be getting our own nuclear missiles. That's 100% for sure. I'm positive of that because this is just silly. This is just silly, and the whole idea is that that is just nonsense to my eyes. I can't really comment anymore, and I don't want to get into that cesspool because for one, I'm not competent enough. I just can make some sentiments and make some thoughts about what I've read, and I'm nowhere near as qualified to comment on American politics. I can just state that I find this plan by Trump to be just abhorrent. Secondly, and on brighter news, well, we finally recorded with John Michael Gauthier. Annette is working on that. It's going to be a properly edited episode, so that's going to happen, which is great. So you're going to get that soon in the weekend. But for now, I wanted to look at some interesting news that have happened somewhat recently that you might have not heard about on mainstream media. First of all, there's a lot of talk about Belarus doing some shady things, well, about massing their troops and everything. But there's another interesting situation there. You see, on June 26th, Belarusian media reported that diplomat Denis Sidorenko, who served as the country's former ambassador to Germany until his dismissal in March, had just died 2 days earlier. Some outlets reported that the diplomat had died of a heart attack, while others said it was suicide. But the authorities soon confirmed Sidorenko's death, but the details surrounding it are still very much unclear. According to some sources, it occurred after the former ambassador was subjected to intense scrutiny by the Belarusian KGB. Just shows that maybe he knew a bit too much and then, was let's just say thrown out of the window. And in other news, something that I really want to talk about is that an opposition blogger from Kazakhstan, one Aidos Sadikov, has died in Kiev. He was fatally wounded in an assassination attempt. He was the author of the Kazakh opposition YouTube channel called Base, which I was following. And again, it's very painful to just know how sometimes dangerous our profession is. This event was reported by his wife, Natalia Sadikova. Quote, Aidos Sadikov left us today at 3 a.m. Kiev time. My beloved husband, the father of our 3 children, a great son of the Kazakh people. Aidos gave his life for Kazakhstan, accepted the martyr's death at the hands of killers. Aidos fought for his life in intensive care for 13 days, but a miracle did not happen. His death is on the conscience of the Kazakh President Tokayev, Natalia wrote. The assassination attempt on Sadikov took place on June 18th. Kazakh citizens Altai Zakhanbayev and Miriam Karatyayev are suspected of committing the crime. According to investigators, the latter approached the car in which Sadikov was with his wife on the day of the assassination attempt and shot him in the head with a pistol with a silencer. The suspects subsequently left for Moldova and were put on the international wanted list. Sadikov's condition after the assassination attempt was assessed as extremely serious. His wife reported that he was in deep coma. Zakhanbayev surrendered to Kazakh law enforcement on June 21st. The Ukrainian Prosecutor General's office said on June 25th they was preparing a request to extradite the suspect, but Kazakh authorities refused to extradite Zakhanbayev. According to Radio Azatik, the suspects may be connected to Kazakhstan's special services. And, well, Aidos and his wife Natalia are the authors of this channel Base, which has just over 1 million subscribers, just slightly below this show. In their videos, they criticize the Kazakh authorities and talk about corruption and police brutality. Since 2014, the Sadikovs have lived in Kiev. In 2023, the Kazakh Ministry of Internal Affairs put the Sadikovs on the wanted list on charges of inciting hatred. Now, complex mess, but just shows us that nothing can really be secured. Now, this is the shilling segment before I go on to the previously long script, because I have been digging through a lot of these Z authors, and oh boy, I'm looking at 10 pages of full script in Arial 11th font. Just saying. So it's going to be a pretty long episode, because I have listened to your advice and I will be speaking a bit slower. So I hope this is going to be fine. But I just wanted to say that please, if you could, support the show on Patreon, patreon.com/theeasternborder. Or also you can go to our homepage, theeasternborder.lv, and click the donate button there. Since, well, we had a kinetic accident with our TV, which was silly. And today I found out I have astigmatism apparently because of my head traumas and multiple concussions that I've suffered throughout my life, and broken bones in the head as well. So that's pretty bad, but I need glasses to drive, so about to get them, and they're not very cheap. But that's among other things. So if you like the show and you consider maybe giving me some help, this would be a nice moment. We've also received a first kind of check for our sold T-shirts, which you can still buy by clicking on the link that's on our homepage. And I'll be looking through all your orders and sending the money for the Club of Angry Patriots ones straight off to my contact in Ukraine for this, and I will give you full accounts. So that you know that how I'm spending your help, and I'm very grateful for it. But now we'll go back to the show, because I hate this segment. I just do it because I have to. Everyone keeps telling me that I have to do it, so I do, and it really helps. But we have a lot of Z authors to look at. A lot of them, by the way, but we'll get to that right now. And as it happens quite often, if one of these Z scumbags talk about some acute problem, the topic is immediately picked up by other channels, which had previously preferred to keep silent on the issue for some reason, in air quotes, the reason being that they probably like to be not incarcerated. Following the text of Anastasia Kashavarova, whom we all know by now, who was talking about the fact that the Russian military command is forcibly sending disabled people who have not been treated properly to fight at the front, other authors began to talk about the same problem. And it turned out that the problem is much bigger than it might have seemed at first glance. And it is connected to two other problems, which are big ones: no men and very high casualties. Philologist in Ambush writes, quote, "We basically have crooked bureaucratic collisions. Semi-disabled wounded continue to remain in service due to the constant prohibition on discharge, minus exceptional circumstances that have yet to be substantiated, including obtaining a D fitness category. In addition, by remaining on the staff of a military unit, a person receives medical treatment, whereas in the case of dismissal, the prospect is blurred. In fact, such people are not able to fulfill their duties properly. Further, the early discharge of untreated servicemen is directly affected by the overload of hospitals. At the same time, people, including those in category G, tend to be returned to the places of temporary deployment of units in the zone of the North Caucasus military district, which in itself is not very favorable. Plus, all the facilities of the nearby rear are in the kill zone of the enemy remote high-precision weapons. By enemy, he here means Ukraine, obviously. Finally, due to the excessive losses in active units engaged in active combat operations, the number of personnel, primary assault units, regularly drops, which cannot be promptly replenished by marching replenishments. Hence the practice of early return of people to the front line on the principle of everyone who can somehow hold a weapon. It is quite natural that such a practice does not contribute in any way to improving the effectiveness of combat work and motivation of the personnel." Another smaller Telegram channel, who, by the way, has usurped the name of one of my favorite video game franchises, Fallout, because the name of his channel is Vault 8. And for those of you who know something about Fallout series, You should be quite familiar with what Vault 8 is. To those of you who maybe aren't, that was the location of the Vault City, which was the big one in Fallout 1 and 2, the old school ones. So I feel very bad when such terms are used because I really love those series. But anyway, he writes the following, quote, "In turn, I will comment on the post about the forced sending of untreated wounded and unwritten cripples to the storm units. This happens unsystematically, fortunately, but in our direction, in at least one brigade, it was all practiced. This is the most despicable and treacherous phenomenon, dropping the authority of command and the Russian Federation armed forces as a whole, and in our own eyes of servicemen. Now, the problem is obviously, and this is my comment here, that you can't really drop the authority of the Russian armed forces when they're already totally in the gutter, but we'll get to that a bit later. Carrying on. When individual butchers, commanders, take out the PPD in hospitals, all those who are expected to recover for a long time, and send them simply for useless disposal." Near the War writes, "The situation is especially difficult with neurological problems, when, for example, a person formally has arms and legs in place, but they do not function properly. In my memory, they tried to send a volunteer to the front whom has been wounded by shrapnel, and the shrapnel had traumatized the spinous processes and lodged near the spine. His legs were completely taken away. His blood pressure was hitting the ceiling, and to put it crudely, go to the front with the shrapnel and don't make a fool of yourself. It was a whole story just to get the shrapnel out. And this is not an isolated case." And then finally, we have Yana Poplavskaya, who writes, quote, "I can confirm the words of Anastasia, that is, Miss Koshevarova, whom I despise horribly, but still. Quote, return to the front with shrapnel in the lungs, with injured limbs. And what about the hospitals? We constantly buy medical supplies. My friends buy bottled drinking water and bandages in packs. These are not frontline hospitals. This is Moscow. The chief doctors are shaking with terror that they'll get a smack on the head from above. But the wounded must be treated and fed. But there are officials and war correspondents who are lying out of their blue eyes that everything is there. They say that bloggers are just living on hype so that they are collecting aid. And then she wishes that their tongues would fall off. But amidst all of this, there are some, supposedly good news about, the main source that is still used for some unknown reason by most mainstream channels. Alexei Sukhonin writes the following, quote, I would like to note the increased professionalism of the Russian Ministry of Defense's information service. By the way, he's a very pro-Russian Z channel, just so you knew. He isn't mentioned here much, so I have to explain. Carrying on. For 6 months now, there have been no errors in the naming of Ukrainian units and formations in the public reports of Comrade Lieutenant General Master of Sport Igor Konashenkov. I'm confident that from the accuracy in naming, we will somehow smoothly be able to move on to accuracy in quantitative indicators. That is, he hopes that maybe one day, Shavarov might actually be able to give some accurate information. Now, as you all know, let's move on to a bit lighter subject here. Kanye West went to Russia. But he didn't give any concerts or anything. He was just there visiting a friend or something, private visit. However, that caused a sharp and very polarized reaction in the Z community. Some are happy for the West and see him as a tool to fight the collective West, despite his horrendous anti-Semitic remarks, while others blame the Moscow elites from being detached from the realities of war. Ria Katyusha writes, quote, all the media are discussing what the American rapper ate and where he pooped. There are no other important topics for the Moscow crowd. Oh yes, some military men burned a couple of trains with equipment that were on their way from the rapper's homeland to kill Russians. Please, such a trife. Here, the black Barian personality deigned to taste the caviar and even looked at the serfs. Andrei Medvedev, no relation to Dmitry Medvedev, by the way, writes, and I like this post, quote, there is another Russia, where the main news is the arrival in Moscow of a rapper from the United States, with whom the black brother ate where he went, some sort of designers and fashion designer figure as well. From the arrival of a fashionable singing Negro, this is a direct quote, and he uses such terms, because they're not even trying to hide their racism. Especially gifted. They have made far-reaching conclusions about the international situation and the breakthrough in the isolation of Russia. In a burst of schizophrenic inspiration, they already want to give Kanye a Russian passport. Yeah, millions of Russians will be standing in line to get one. Once again, it is all too clear how parallel realities the two Russias live in, fighting and walking. Starszy Ed, or older than the Ed, writes, and that's a very neo-Nazi channel, that's straight up Rusic. The only channel more neo-Nazi than older than the Ed is the Rusic guys themselves. And he writes the following, quote, "To some people's tongues are empty, and to some people perils are small. Someone sits for 6 hours in a trench in sizzling heat or in savage cold, and someone waits for 6 hours for an American Negro," again, not even trying to hide their racism, Kanye West, and falls into ecstasy watching him sailing on the Moscow River on a yacht. The latter are abominable before the face of God because they have created an idol for themselves from among the heroes of Don't Threaten South Central. Archangel of the Spetsnaz writes, "In Moscow, on various squares and other places, people don't know what's going on about the war." Just as a comment to this Kanye West while quoting something else, which is pretty true. Two Majors, another channel that you all know by heart at this point, writes, "Just more proof of how different info posts reign among the capital's bohemians and the people. Having a number of Russophobic punches in his tracks, Kanye nevertheless replaced Ukrainian designer Alexander Kanievsky with Russian Gosha Rubichinsky in his team after the start of the special military operation. If the visit of such characters to us is an opportunity to drive a wedge into the enemy's info pole, then it should be used. But we have creativity in high offices only after approvals, and creativity does not tolerate paper. This is why it is necessary, not with Kanye, but with the media, which is carrying an overseas guest as in a right of idolatry. If Kanye goes to Donbass, then he will be ours, but not yet." However, interestingly enough, Mr. Dugin, yes, Dugin himself also writes about the situation. He wrote, and this is a brilliant quote, "Dedicated to my buddy and a fellow Duginist, Dugin's expert, Alexander von Sternberg Ungern." Yeah, the Mad Baron of California, because he has now written, and you can quote Dugin now, and I give you this beautiful quote to be used in your workplaces, with your friends and your family. Quote, Alexander Dugin writes, "Kanye West, by the way, is ideologically ours." So, just so you knew. But Abbas Juima, another Z poster, contradicts him. Quote, "Is he a Negro who walks his wife naked like an animal all the time and reads about drugs, debauchery, and all sorts of filth? And what's his ideology?" So, obviously, all this is a bit weird. Sons of the Monarchy, guys from another channel that you have heard on this show about, writes, because Kanye West commenting has reached peak levels here. "We've been rasping so much here with you that Russia has stopped engaging in Western cargo cultism, and Russian youth have begun to take more interest in their own culture and history. And now an American Negro has come to Moscow to drink at Rubinshinsky's birthday party, and many media and channels have blown this into an event of universal proportions, as if we had won the special military operation." This is going to be carrying on for a bit. Voyenkor Astrahань, quote, "This is an extremely clear evidence of who is really the leader of opinions of a couple of generations at once, who has millions of subscribers and views, and who has inflated numbers in just an exchange of mutual praise. Kanye West is, no matter how one treats his work and personality, a reality. That is why people like me are making jokes today, news and are working, and our philosophers, musicians, stars, and Hollywood nudgers are silent. And what to say when there is nothing to say? It seemed like yesterday that there is no West and there is no Kanye and Kim, and then reality crept up unnoticed." But Vaše novosti, and reposted by Prilupa Zalupin, or Zahar Prilepin, to those of you who somehow want to honor him by giving out his real name, writes, and this is a serious case, by the way, "The visit of Tucker, West, Hinkle to Russia is a blow to the Western elites at war with us. And here we should not be prudes shouting, yes, we don't know who he is, yes, listen to his songs, yes, look, his wife was naked. Kanye is, in fact, the enemy of our enemy, an enemy with enormous influence and a gigantic audience across the world." But, Dugin also said, ideologically ours, after all. But the racism of the Z authors does not end there, because once again, Z authors are somehow not very happy about the Palestinian refugees whose struggle against Israel they so enthusiastically supported, starting with the October 7th terrorist attack. So, let's go. 43,000 Palestinian refugees who have been suffering from the war with Israel for 8 months will receive comfortable housing with all modern infrastructure in Russia. The first part has already moved to us, and I think that in the near future they will receive all citizenship. Unlike Palestinians, Tajiks, Uzbeks, and others, for example, a Russian from Latvia, Kirill Fyodorov, is still not given citizenship, as it cannot get many more Russian people in spirit and values. These are not words, but system decisions. And while these decisions are against the Russian people. P.S. They write in person that it is less, but they do not write the real figure. On the video, I see a whole comfortable neighborhood. But for people in Kursk and in Belgorod, nothing close is even being given to them at all. This is yet again for Roman Adekhin. So we have a lot of weird things. The 13th, the channel that is also extra racist, writes, and it's time to kulak these people, leprechauns. We have 20 years of contract soldiers waiting in line for housing, and they're building cities for some greasy monkeys on Russian taxpayers' money. It's fucked up. Well, Mr. 13, I wish you died in the war, and you're more fucked up than anything happening, but hey, it's nice to just be able to call people Negroes for no reason and just offend them and have no consequences because you live in a basically failed state full of misery and suffering. Just crazy and stupid. However, he shouldn't be speaking about Russians the same way because the author of the channel, Rosgvardeyets, once again raises a very important and very painful topic for the Z authors. They apparently got the wrong people in Russia. The people are not interested in the war. They do not support it. Now, as a side note, my own article on this has not yet been published, but we're working on it. It's just that there were some issues with our editor, personal tragedies, which delay the whole process, but we're on it so that you'll have a listen to it, but read it. But this is going to be very, very similar to this. But perhaps, a good illustration to this text will be of the channel IGIZ volunteer movement, which clearly demonstrates that Belgrade also has not woken up, and the attitude to people in military uniform there is also, correspondent. Quote, I have been here in Belgrade. It's one of the biggest cities of our motherland. Most people don't give a fuck, as it was and still is. For them, the war is still very far away. They don't care about tomorrow. It will come anyway in their own world. They say so guilty. I'm not very interested in the subject of war, and everything is fine. They only hang posters, and even there's a clean, well-fed fighter who's offered to sign a contract for money and the slogan, join yourselves. And who is in their own? Hont Galya, the neighbor of Sanya from next door, who yesterday killed his first Ukrainian on the assault, whom they have never seen. Of course, Hont Galya is closer. And for them, Sanya looks from the poster well-fed, well-dressed, and well-moneyed. Do you feel the difference? There is no purpose except for the dough, the cash money. Go for the dough, not for the fact that those who took up arms against Russia, Ukrainians, should be destroyed. Because, again, these guys obviously cannot move past the fact that they are Nazi scum and that Russia invaded Ukraine, not the vice versa, and this idea that somehow Ukraine attacked Russia, that is a prevailing idiocy going on there, which is just silly. I cannot shut up about this, but I'll just rather continue and you make your own decisions after all. Not for the fact that they are trying to tear us apart and drink up our resources, but for the cash. Money is, of course, good, and a lot of people go after it. Only on posters for the others, it's just for the money. Not for fighting for our people, or peace or future, but just for the money. And the people, they don't give a fuck, why should they? There is no war around for them. You can't see it. Again, they will say that politicians can't make up their minds, and of course they will be right, but it's bullshit. Excuses for complacency. They find a reason for themselves and justify why they don't give a fuck. And who of them ask themselves a question? What if tomorrow they set more specific goals and say we have to go to war? What then? Would everyone run away at once? Yeah, no, folks, that's not going to happen. There'll be shock, fear, and panic, storming Lars, which is the point of border crossing from Russia to Ukraine. hiding outside the city, fake certificates, and other 500 shit. 500 being the code name for those who desert or avoid their service. Wake up and wake up the country. But how? Without blood. How to wake up those who haven't been shot yet? I don't know the answer to that. I know how they can wake up by being shot at, how they woke up in Belgrade and Kursk. And even then, not all of them. But without shooting, I don't know. Our people cannot yet move away from the idle life of a consumer. They want peace and quiet. But the war, it's already here. Thank you to those who have realized this and are helping. Maybe your example will be contagious sooner or later, although I personally hope it will be sooner. That's Rosgvardeyets. Aige's volunteer movement writes, quote, "Today, our brothers, motorized riflemen, faced unexpectedly with gaining popularity in refusing to serve people in uniform in catering establishments. Not anywhere but in Belgrade itself. The soldiers traveled to the big land in Belgrade for the needs of the service, decided to have lunch at Mesto Grill on Holy Trinity Boulevard 7, where they were refused service because the guests did not meet the dress code and were dressed in military uniform. It is strange. What should a military man be wearing when going out for service, and even more so in a city where there is shelling from the Ukrainian side?" And, well, weirdly enough, this just doesn't even end with the civilians in all these cities. Somewhat unexpectedly, the author of Don't Stop War channel, yes, he's some sort of war fanatic who well, hasn't experienced stuff that I have, seeing how it's like in the front lines, but he wrote this text with actually quite sensible speculations about the unhappy post-war future of this so-called Putin's new elite. Quote, "Let's be honest with each other. The focus of the special military operation is smoothly drifting away and other interests are emerging. Speaking of an elite from among the participants of this military operation, everything of this sounds loud and this doesn't inspire much confidence. Today is not the Soviet Union, and many people do not know how their fate will turn out. A huge number of soldiers who will be left without their due allowances, compensation, and rehabilitation. All this sounds quite realistic given the list of instances through which all the documents pass, and a soldier can be left with empty pockets and without the prosthesis because someone made a mistake in filing out the documentation. Someone will have domestic problems in the family, someone will feel lonely and will not be able to find a place for himself, someone will be left with a promise of rehabilitation and the new prosthesis but will not wait for the promise. The list goes on for a long time. War is a long-term endeavor. Not every citizen of our country is ready to go long-term and support our soldiers. 2 years and more have made it possible to realize that it's not about content, beautiful voice, knowledge, etc. There are patient and resilient citizens. The rest have a good road. Why am I thinking about this? I realize that my big country is not interested in my fate, but I'm interested in the future of my country, my children, and society." And, all this also doesn't really show anything about good morale. However, we're going to go back to the authors that you already know and that you're familiar with, because the Z propaganda scumbags, Anastasia Kashavarova and the philologist in ambush, the same guy quoted in the beginning, tell readers about the reasons for the catastrophic shortage of the people at the front. It's not just about losses and the fact that there are no volunteers and contractors are running out. The problem, as these inhuman swine write, is also that according to the documents of the Ministry of Defense, everything's doing well. And it's quite likely that when the notional Dmitry Medvedev writes about tens of thousands of people sent to fight, he honestly really believes this. And they are shocked about how, their government is just treating all the situation. Because once again, I truly believe that these people, they somehow see that there are two Russias instead of one, because one Russia is like this patriotic sovereign land that they fight for, and the other one is what they actually got. It just is all super silly. Quote, "Why do undertreated fighters get to the front lines? It's because of the same thing, because of left-wing reports that hide the real balance of forces and number of personnel, because of reports that everyone went on vacation, that contractors and volunteers came more than 500,000, although we remember how contractors were recruited. They forced mobilized people to sign, because of the real shortage of fighters in the front." That's on the Russian side, mind you. "Will any of the military experts tell us, how many platoon numbers do we have now? How much is a company, a battalion? How much is a regiment and how much is a division? We can have a platoon of 3 men and 100 regiment and a division of less than 1,000. But in the reports, they do not write real numbers. They write battalions, brigades, divisions, and the fact that the name does not reflect the number of personnel. No one gets into it. And now the new leadership of the ministry came into the bubble, probably at a loss and do not know what to grab for. And why the shortage of fighters at the front? 1. Because at the beginning of the special military operation and for a long time afterward, the generals and leadership of the Ministry of Defense thought that drones were not serious, and we suffered losses in personnel and equipment. 2. Because they sent untrained people to the front who could not shoot. Normal commanders tried to save them and they themselves died. 3. Because many assaults are held without artillery support. Yep, because meat assaults haven't gone anywhere. And somewhere artillery hits their own and the tankers do not take into account the terrain and also from a hillside hinges on their own. Because professionals, artillerymen, tankers, air defense specialists, surgeons and so on were sent to stupid assaults on villages where they just died. 5. Because of unreasonable approach, unprofessional, results in not only untrained but really tough warriors dying in vain. Who can and want to fight and can lead and teach people? They are all dead. And 6. Because most of the high command is sitting not even on the territory of the special military operation, but somewhere in Rostov and do not know what's going on. There are a lot of these becauses. And now the commanders in the field replenish their losses with people on crutches and they do not know what to do with it. And according to reports, they have basically the enemy, that is the Ukrainians, whom we support, they apparently have replenishment of combat-ready people. So that's one of their biggest fears, really. But carrying on from what Anastasia Kashevara writes. That said, I'm well aware of how the Storm Z and the V can make a nice rack, but I'm not writing about the tricky class who has 2 shards in his arm and can't be reached because he might be left without an arm, and he whines about being sent to the front. I don't write about panderers and cowards, about mama's boys who have a snot hanging down their throat and whine that they can't fight. I'm writing about the facts of sending disabled people to the front lines, who are on crutches, whose arms and legs can't bend. There are fractures that are not mended and so on. We have one in captivity with fractured legs because he was sent to the front line and treated. What a disgraceful position. Just to send people to the assault without legs. Anastasia Kashvarova. And the philologist in ambush gives us the following comment on this. The number of our forces in principle does not correspond to the tasks of conducting active offensive operations. The quality of personnel is not much better in some places, both in replenishments and among old servicemen, including due to the banal wear and tear of the body, plus frankly responsible attitude to the issue of saving people on the part of a significant part of the command staff. The enemy, again, that would be the Ukrainians for these assholes. The Ukrainians may not fall asleep before our ability to track people to the contract sensibly. And by the way, we already lack the strength to radically develop success in a number of operational areas. Not to like in Chasiv Yar, by the way, which Ukrainians had to leave today. But that was a heavy decision, but a necessary one. And, well, that's at least one of the good news coming from the front. But we'll get to the good news for the Ukrainians soon. First, we need to finish with the bad news for the Russian segments. By the way, we already lack the strength to radically develop success in a number of operational areas, not to mention the fact that somewhere we are at once, again, sadly, bogged down. And then there is a very unusual post, which is written by the author of the Z channel Triplex. He urges the readers to stop normalizing murder and violence and dehumanizing enemies. The post, of course, is still very ideologically pro-Putin, pro-war charged, but it's impossible to disagree with some of his thoughts. Special thanks, by the way, to one Ilya Shepelin and his volunteers who found the very fragment of the report that Triplex writes about. Weirdly enough, this post is also important because this specifically shows that the criminalization of Russia is becoming more and more of a problem. As I was working on this situation, there was another shooting in the city of Russia, which I need to investigate. Then there were also some rumors about Prigozhin being alive, although I haven't gotten a real confirmation. So I won't touch on that part. But I'm also making a specific episode about Habib, whose surname I still cannot pronounce. I have been redone this take like 5 times already at this point, but whatever. What happened is that his, as I mentioned in previous episodes, one of his students was caught into this terror attack in Dagestan, right? And now Habib's funds have been frozen all over Russia because he's never supported the war. He's never participated in the bouts in the octagon with the Russian flag. Now his funds have been frozen and he's under investigation because of his school and everything. And that's a complex matter. Expect the next episode to be about this because, well, I can't really make a lot of stuff that I wanted to. There's just too much news to cover. Oh yeah, after John Michael Gaultier episodes, of course, but still. But still, there's something interesting about this post, how it shows how criminalized Russia has become. And if you look at this from this perspective, it's becoming such a large problem that even Z authors are writing about this. Quote, Channel 1, images of hunting for an unarmed wounded soldier of the enemy. The hunted unarmed animal is rushing from side to side and trying to escape from the soulless creature, but it catches up with him. All this under the cheerful music and brave comments of the announcer. And that's on a federal channel. This whole web is full of such footage. It's full of them on both sides. Everyone has long since been dehumanized and turned into bastards. Why are we following in the same footsteps? For more than 2 years, we have been systematically taught to die, to normalize murder and violence. In pursuit of hype, playing on the basis of human beings' human sensibilities, the channels are dumping uncensored hell on people. A time bomb planted in the immature consciousness. The truth of life, someone will say. Fine. Shitting in the toilet is also truth of life. Shall we put it on display? And the cosmic rise in stabbings, out of nowhere. Images of violence accompanied by advertising of NKVD fins and the like, without a core, value, and semantic information policy, are formed on the subconscious of not very strong minds into very dangerous semantic patterns. Did these people came to such idea by itself? We are yet to face an increase in violence on the part of former frontline soldiers after the war, as it was after the Great Patriotic War, inevitably, because people don't come back with a healthy psyche, and everyone's psyche is broken in different ways. And those who are inherently deviant in their behavior will manifest it, certainly. Oddly, now all this will be aggravated by the mass of people in the rear with damaged psyches and perceptions of the world, for whom death and murder becomes a kind of a drug. How many cries there were about computer games simulating the growth of violence? Now, instead of computer games, there is endless footage of real people being killed. What is stronger and more effective in breaking the psyche? Generating masses of potential killers? Well, now, that is a rhetorical question. Hype on exclusive footage of someone's death is easy and requires no brains, but it guarantees the growth of the resource. Creating an ethical but highly engaging and emotionally semantic and informational field is extremely difficult and requires intelligence and brains of content creators, which then, as I would comment, this means that Russia will never be able to do that because they have, well, literally zero such people. But finishing on from this quote, judging by our information field, there are only few of them, and these few, in the absence of any adequate regulation systems, do not determine the general state of the information environment, yielding to the high flyers on trash content. And this is more than tragic. But I'd like to end this episode, which is slightly longer than the normal ones, by something positive. Something that is not gonna be horrible stuff. Because for one, Russia has stretched itself thin. See, unlike in the previous Ukrainian counter-assault, there are no Surovikin line. There are no 6 months of preparing. And the Z authors, well, they're getting a bit panicky. See, the channel Game of Civilization discusses the alleged upcoming counteroffensive, this new one, of the Ukrainian army, suggesting that the command is deliberately saving men, equipment, and ammunition. Another curious thesis of the author is that the new defense minister was appointed by Putin solely to eliminate the consequences of Shoigu's management of the department and in no way to build a more effective army, which I agree with, because Belousov cannot build a sandcastle or a medieval castle from Legos more or less than a whole army, because I bet he considers Legos to be form of devil worship or something of that sort. Quote, now the front in Volchansk is standing, and in the south, our troops are slowly moving forward, slowly, without breakthroughs, coverage, and destruction of large enemy units, as in World War I, and for the same reasons. We cannot reduce the importance of these reasons to zero without recognizing the armed forces, and the need for the latter is not clear to the authorities. Belousov was put into place to clean up the cesspool left by Shoigu, not to build regiments of the new system. That means that the positional deadlock will continue to prevail on the front. And here we need to ask again the question that has already been asked on the channel. Where are the people who are caught up in the TCC buses? This is the most important question of all the questions that are out there. Not the appearance of F-16s in the summer, but the people. F-16s will clearly cause us a lot of problems and unnecessary losses, but they will not change the situation on the front. The armed forces of Ukraine is now counterattacking only very locally with relatively small forces, much smaller than they have. Of course, they suffer losses, but they are not fatal and they can make up for them. And here we need to look from a different angle at news like, quote, to compensate for losses, Ukraine needs to conscript 50,000 people a month. They do not have such losses, not even close to them. So where do they need so many soldiers? There are too many of them to even form reserve units and brigades. For what task do they need such a mass of people? News like, Ukraine has lost 1/3 of the Leopards delivered also raises the question about the other 2/3. What are they? There's a serious risk that the Ukrainian armed forces will attack after all. And all these poor people caught on the streets and all these tanks, F-16s and everything else that was and will be given to Ukraine by the honorable partners of our authorities will be thrown into battle. If our guys can't prepare for it properly, the AFU will have no chance of success. But it is necessary to prepare, not to get into the offensive ourselves, not to spend people and save up ammunition and UAVs. In the chat rooms, you can find statements from active Ukrainian soldiers that something is being prepared for the fall. Maybe about the fall and the timing will be different, but something is being prepared for sure. And Sirsky has the men for the offensive. Bad and motivated, but they're there. He has been saving them for a long time, not throwing them into the meat grinder, and he has accumulated them. And that is equipment, although not enough. There are problems with ammunition, but we don't know why. Maybe they're hoarding. We'll have to keep this all in mind. If we miss a hit like this, it's going to be a real blow. And having good free reserves on our side from the middle of the summer will become critical. Now here I'd like to add that Russian side, as you might have noticed, which is why I built this episode this way, Russia has insane manpower problems. They're stretched thin. They're sending disabled people on the front lines en masse, and they have low morale. And Ukrainians really have been defending with basically one arm tied behind their backs. They are building something, definitely. And I think this also ties into the very first thing that I mentioned in the show about Trump presidency and his peace plan. I think that, as Zelensky stated that he wants to speak with Trump and to know his plan very carefully in person to understand the future of Ukraine and everything. And I think that what Ukraine is going to do is going to do a massive push and do a lot of effort there because they have a good chance of breaking through their lines. I think that if Trump's plan actually is like the one that was reported on Politico, that this is there to change it both in the long run and in the short term. Ukraine wants to be sure that Trump will have to completely change his plan and adapt the situation. They will try to make a strike because there is no sort of econ line at this point. There is nothing. And I've heard a lot of people have been saying that the war will either end in October or will last for 10 more years, depending on the situation. Because you see November as United States presidential election, and up until that point, you have to understand that plans that Trump has, they rely on the fact that Ukraine is just stuck in the stalemate. If Ukraine makes a breakthrough and a massive push, and Russia suffers a major loss, well, I've been to the States a couple of times. I intend to visit it again, because I still need to show Evita both Boston, which is my favorite city. Favorite state, though, is Texas, but I need to show her Boston. And I really need to go back to New York City, which is, I consider that to be the capital of all of the free world. Not just an American icon. And I really would like to go to Vegas and see Grand Canyon, because I really, really think that my trip to Texas was not my last trip to the United States. I love the United States, really. It's sort of one of the best countries on planet Earth, in my opinion. Felt very awesome there. But in all of this, I think that, you guys don't like a loser. I have also watched the reaction of many Americans who watch soccer, football for the rest of us, who were very disappointed about Greg Berhalter and how America crashed out, was grouped in Copa America. By the way, first time ever when a host nation of Copa America does not even make out of their own group, and first competition in 20 years in soccer that America hosts, and they hosted a bunch of them where they cannot do anything. And I saw the outrage there. So if Zelensky can make it look like that they have outsmarted the Russians, and they're in the position where they can do it because, again, the Russian situation is very dire and doesn't seem like Belousov is doing anything, then there's real hope of just leaving Trump no choice. Because if with his statements, if with this plan that we now have read through Politico, Zelensky can make Trump look like a loser, then hey, that might both influence the elections, and even if Trump wins, the outcome of his plans and the whole war. And with this note, I'd like to say, до свидания, товарищи. And of course, remember, happiness is mandatory.